Hey everybody, it's time for another story, or I've got a story. Uh, I need to give you a couple trigger warnings. Trigger number one: my dogs have been especially agitated because they hear thunder, and so they've been kind of barking. And I don't know how much this microphone is picking up. I can hear them, but I don't know if y'all can. So if you hear lots of howling, they're okay. They just don't like all the racket that God is creating with the storms. The other one is the story I want to share today is regarding my vision issues. And some people get the icks when you start talking about eyes and eye surgeries and things like that. So I just kind of wanted to give you a heads up on that, just in case you get a little Uh, but this was part of my life, and this is part of my story. So I'll try to be gentle. But it goes back to before we go to the part where I actually start losing my vision. I need to recap a little bit regarding the Cuban crisis story. So I was born in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and my mother was blind from the cataracts, and she was expecting me. They couldn't do the surgery because she was expecting me. So I don't think I shared the part about the fact that she had the surgery when I was about 6 months old, and so she didn't really see me until I was a few months old. Uh, but luckily, we had good neighbors who helped her, uh, taking care of this huge 10 pound 9 ounce baby. And I'm sure with all the formula that I was drinking, I probably gained a whole lot of weight. In fact, if I ever get an opportunity to learn how to add pictures, I'll show you some of my Gerber baby pictures that I have, or more like turkey, uh, big old turkey sized babies. Um, but anyway, so she was dealing with that. And one of the other things I need to share with you is when she was a young child, her parents were divorced, and she was taken from her mom, and that's somebody else's story. But she was taken from her mom at a young age, so she wasn't raised with her mother, but her stepmother was a wonderful one, and she was just a good mom. Uh, but my mom really didn't know her mother that well. She was in contact with her later in life, but didn't really know a whole lot about the family history, which will be pertinent later. So here she is, being a military wife, very young, and then she's expecting my brother. I was about 4 years old. She's expecting my brother, but it comes to find out she has cancer. So one thing after another, I guess, and and because my father was, in the military, he was on ships and he was gone all the time. It was hard for her to take care of me with all the issues. So she stayed with her family in Columbia, South Carolina, which is close to Fort Jackson. Her father was Army, so he's familiar with Fort Jackson. And so they're dealing with that. And then we're staying with the grandparents. And one day, I think my brother was about 2 weeks old, 2 or 4 weeks old, uh, and she's pretty sick, and and she couldn't even hardly care for my brother because she was running fevers, and you have to worry about contagions when you're dealing with an infant and you have a fever. I mean, even I had to deal with that when my oldest was born, and so one day my right eye just completely shuts. So they're trying to figure out what's going on with me in that regard. And then come to find out I had cataracts. A 4 year old with cataracts was very curious, and they really didn't have the capacity to care for someone my age with a disease that is known for a geriatric issue. And then they start connecting dots, knowing that my mother had had cataracts when I was born, and but they really didn't have um, an understanding of what they were dealing with, I don't think. And then dealing with the fact that my mother had the cancer, taking care of a small child, and so it was just a lot going on. So Fort Jackson just says you need to go back home to Norfolk. Maybe they can help you. So she gets back, and again, they don't really know what to do with a young child at my age with cataracts. So they're having to make a game plan, and it's not like they just will you in and do surgery. There's a lot of studying, a lot of investigative, medical investigation going on. And so they start looking into the family history and coming to find out my grandmother had had cataracts a little bit later in life, maybe late 20s, early 30s, but she had had cataracts as well. And then I think my father did some connecting some other dots and making a graph of all the family. He was good at stuff like that. And so there was other family members who were known to have cataracts as well. So they're starting to kind of like see the pattern. And but in the meantime, you're still dealing with a 4-year-old, and so they're trying to get that prepared. They're telling my mom she has to have surgery, probably a hysterectomy, and I'm gonna need surgery. But she's like, take care of my daughter first. You always take care of the baby first before you take care of yourself. That's not what they tell you on airplanes with the oxygen mask, but that's what mothers usually do, is they focus on their child. So she tells them, take care of her first. And so they're getting everything planned out and do appointments and all that stuff to get everything figured out. And then my left eye started being affected by the cataracts as well. So they know, okay, we got to do something. So they take care of me. They have the doctors do my surgery. And then they're finally able to take care of my mom. She had like prolapse issues, and everything was falling apart, literally, inside her, as I said, baby carriage is what I called it. So they do that, and then so I had my first surgery. I don't know if I had my first pair of glasses at that time or not, but I know later, either from when I was 4 or 6, I had my first pair of glasses, and this is about the thickness of my glasses. You've probably seen real thick glasses, and you remember back then they didn't have the plastic lenses like we do now, but everything was made out of glass, so it was pretty heavy, and I would have imprints on my nose from the weight of the glasses. So they do the surgery, and then my father gets stationed in Key West, Florida. Okay, so now we're moving to Florida, and I start having some other issues, and so she takes me to the doctors there and has a big old fight with the different doctors there, because one of them's misdiagnosing me, and she knew that they were not correct. And I'm looking at my timing, and so she's fighting with them, and they tell my dad, you need to keep your woman straight. And he's like, yeah, good luck with that. So she's trying to get me the care I need for the vision, because I start having problems again. And she gets in touch with a doctor that's not military, and he's in Orlando. So she gets the money together, and that's going to be another story regarding her art. But because she became an artist in Florida, and so she was making a little bit of money from selling art, and so she was able to get me seen by a doctor in Orlando. And he's like, there's somebody in Florida, in Miami, that would be perfect for helping her. but let me work out some details because it was going to be it was a civilian hospital, and military was basically on poverty line. They don't pay the military that. Our military and our police officers and our teachers are probably one of the most least paid people and the ones that are needed the most, I would say. Um, but yes, I was getting medical care, and yes, we had a roof over our head, and yes, we were okay. We were all right, but it wasn't like we were getting rich or anything like that, and not enough to pay for private specialists. But they work out something with the doctors at Bascom Palmer in Miami, and she's able to get me seen by the specialist, Dr. Gass. And apparently this Dr. Gass is a very well respected, very influential doctor at that time. And for years after, actually, I found out he was a professor at Vanderbilt after he retired from his practice. So they see me, and they created a game plan to get me seen, to get me the care I need to have more surgery, because the cataracts was beginning to be an issue. And so they do surgery in one eye, and I know I was in a room with other children at one time, but another surgery I had, I was actually put on the same floor because they saw cataracts, so they put me on the same floor as elderly. And I remember there being this gentleman in the room next to mine, and I would hear him in the night crying out for his medication because he was in so much pain. And it would get me upset because I think by this time I was almost 6, and so the nurses went and told him, okay, you're getting this little girl upset. She hears you crying for your medicine, and she's mad at us because we won't give you your medicine. And what it was is because I believe he had cancer, and they had him on special medicine, and they couldn't explain to me because I was so young. But now that I'm older, I kind of get the idea that he was probably on morphine, and they could only give him so much, and he was probably in extreme pain. But I would hear him crying, so I was upset. And one of the things that they had told me when I was getting ready to have surgery, I wasn't supposed to cry. That was one thing that was beat into my brain, I guess you could say, because they were worried about causing more issues with my eyes. So they're like, okay, you got to talk to this little girl because she's worried about you. So they're like, okay. They wheeled me over and introduced me to him, and I don't remember the whole conversation, but he basically said, I'm okay, they're taking good care of me. I just hurt sometimes. And so that I thought that was sweet that they were concerned about me being upset about this man that's going through more than what I was going through. But one of the things that I try to explain to people who think cataract surgery is you just go and you get laser treatment. That's not how it was done back then. Back then, they had to wait for the cataract to get to a certain point, and then they actually would have to cut the cataract out. And I won't go into too much detail. If you're interested, there's videos on it, I'm sure, on YouTube. But they have to cut the eye to take the cataract out, and they have to sew it up. And I get confused as to exactly what they use, but it was either catgut or silk that they use for the eye, and it's probably a combination of the both too. So it wasn't like you go home the next day or 2 days later and go back to your life. They would have to tie one arm to my bed because I had a tendency to flip over when I was sleeping, and I couldn't sleep on my stomach. And then I had patches on the eye, so here I was going blind in the right eye, or pretty much blind in the right eye. They're doing surgery on the left, so they have to patch the other eye up. So that's gauze and gauze and gauze, and like an aluminum patch over it, and they have to basically keep me contained and keep me from causing any issues. Because after I have surgery, I had to really be careful and not to undo the surgery. And one of the other things, like I said, had to make sure I didn't cry. And there was one time that I was in so much pain, and I don't remember when this was, but I remember one time my eyes hurt so bad I did cry, and they had told me I was going to have more surgery. I thought it was because I cried, but what it was is I had glaucoma, and I was crying because I was so much pain from the glaucoma. If you've ever had glaucoma, I'm so sorry, because that stuff is painful. So they had to redo the surgery, so that meant I was in the hospital longer. Now, one of the things also with my situation was, this is beginning of me going to first grade, and here I was missing months of school. And we're so blessed because in QS, I had just had excellent teachers and an excellent principal, and they took time with me to tutor me when I was home and to help get me back. And I think there was even a teacher strike at a certain part of the time, and they were coming to help me get caught up with the rest of the students. So you can sit there and you could focus on all the negative and all the bad stuff that was happening, but really, I had some good people in my life. There were friends of my mom that I couldn't be in an airplane because it was dangerous for the cabin pressure for my eyes. So we would have friends who would drive me and my mom from QS to Miami. And if you ever been on those bridges going from QS to Miami, that's not an easy drive. And they helped. And then other family members of my step grandmother were in Florida, and they would help. So, I wish I could tell you life was horrible and bad and all that, and it sucked, but we were fortunate in the people that were involved. Like I said, the doctors that provided care, they had my mom pay for the hospital room, but the doctors actually provided my care without cost. Now, how many doctors do you know that do stuff like that? Now, of course, I was a teaching opportunity for them because, they learned a lot from me. Like I said, I was only 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old a part of the time, and I was one of four known at this time, and this is late 60s, that was known to have congenital cataracts. It was not something that was a norm. Like I said, cataracts was considered a geriatric issue. Now, there's a whole lot more to the story as far as, more vision issues, because I had retina detachment when I was 21, and I had some issues going on when I was a teenager. But this is the preliminary story of my issues. So basically what ended up happening was I lost all my vision in my right eye, but they were able to save my left eye to a certain extent, but I always had to have bifocals. So I always had good doctors who cared about me, and when there was some bad ones who weren't doing what they were supposed to do, Mama took care of it. It's one of those things. The polar bear or whatever Taylor Pillen said came out, and she's like, "Yeah, my daughter gets care. My daughter is going to be seen. My daughter is going to have the correct the doctors who are going to provide the best care for her," and she was able to make sure that I had the best care. And most of my life I had enough vision to be able to do almost everything that other kids did. Dodgeball was not a good thing for me because I had glasses that's not a good combination. Dodgeball and class classes. That's not a good connection there. And so we were kind of having a fight, JFK, about that because he was pushing uh, physical education on for public schools, and we were like, no, she can't play dodgeball. She can't do certain sports because it's dangerous, and we had to fight school board because of stuff like that. But we most of the time we were pretty much taken care of, and I had read the testament when I turned 21, so there's a whole lot more to that, and this story will go a lot longer if I, you know, got into that. But I want to share this preliminary part of my story with you because I know it sounds kind of vain, to talk about my story like this and what I've been through and how brave I was, or whatever. But really what it does is it reminds me of how blessed I was, how fortunate I was, because it could have gone a totally different way. It could have been where I never got to see at all, from the time I was 4 or 5 years old. I know what it's like to not see, and believe me, I am very fortunate. And yes, it's been a struggle. Yes, I've had some hard stuff in my life, but guess what? So has everybody. Everybody has their own cross to bear, and this just happened to be mine. And I'm going to skip ahead to something that I shared with some students, because that's the other thing, is I got to be a teacher. I can't explain to you how that happened, but I became a computer teacher, of all things, and I taught elementary school and high school for a while. But I had some younger kids in one of my classes, and one of the things I always did when I had a new class, and this was Christian school, so I got away with preaching to the kids, but I had a class, and I know there was one person in the class that he had some health issues. He had some, and part of it was his eyes, but part of it was some other health issues as well. And I always share with my kids, hey, I'm blind in one eye. I'm partially blind in my left eye, but I do this and I do this. And I said, but I can't drive. And the kids would go, well, how do you do what you do if you can't drive? How do you get to church? How do you get to work? How do you get to, because I was doing Awana and I was teaching dance as well. Like, how do you do this? I says, well, you know what? God has provided me. Yes, I might not be able to see, but he's given me 100 pair of other eyes. And they'd be like, okay, what does that mean? I said, well, yes, I can't see very well because of my vision. I said, but what God has done is provided me with other people in my life who are there for me to help me get to where he wants me to go. If he wants me to be someplace, if he wants me to be in church, he's going to provide a way for me to get to church. If he wants me to help with Awanas, he's going to provide a way for me to be at Awanas. He's going to provide a way for me to be involved in VBS. He's going to provide a way for me to be able to teach my dance stuff. He's going to be able to provide a way for me to teach my computer classes and whatever else he had me teaching at the time. Some of the stuff that I've done, it's amazing. And apparently one of the children went home to his mom and said, I thought I had problems, but Miss Sherrard, she's got a lot of stuff going on, but she does all this other stuff. So I guess I shouldn't be complaining about my problems. And she was quoting a little bit of what he said, but basically it was his way of saying, if Miss Sherrard can do it, I can do it. And and I always appreciate those kinds of stories, because that was the thing. If I've been through stuff, that's one thing. But if something helps encourage somebody else who's going through stuff, then okay, I got this, or God's got this. And if he needs to use me, and that's why for a long time one of my Bible verses that I kind of leaned on was how when Paul was Saul and he lost his vision and he was blind for a while and then he was healed of vision, but the Bible always kind of alludes to the fact that he had a thorn in his side, and the verse kind of I'm kind of changing the quote a little bit, but he had the thorn in his side and he prayed 3 times for it to be removed, and we never really know what a thorn is, but I like to think it was his vision, but it could have been something else. I mean, the man was beat up. Um, and he says, but God didn't remove it. So if if I don't have my own power, then I have God's power. And that's like I said, I've totally messed up the quote, but I'm kind of targeting on the fact that whatever we're going through, we're not going through alone. God's always there with us. He's going to get you through it, and he's going to provide other people. Sometimes it's total strangers. That I had one time I was in church, and this person who didn't even know me turned around and says, "I don't know why, but God told me that I was supposed to introduce myself to you, and let you know that if you ever need anything, that you can call on me." And she gave me a card with her name and phone number on it, and we became friends. And what, you know, it happens. You know, life is hard, but we don't have to do this alone. God has given us so many people that we can lean on, so many people in our life that are there to help us. And I think the hardest part about when I lost my vision and when I got diagnosed with MS, the hardest part for me was learning to ask for help, learning to say, "Hey, can I get a ride?" That was a hard part, because there was a time from the time I was 16 to the time I was 21, I was driving. And I was going to school, and I had 3 part-time jobs, and I'll get into that more the next time. But and then bam, you know, I'm back to depending on other people, and the same thing with EMS. You know, I've had to say, I can't do this by myself. I need help. I need someone to get me from here to there. I need someone to, you know, I had to break down and get a wheelchair, because I just was getting exhausted just trying to get from one place to the other, and falling and breaking bones, you know, and busting my head open. That's not fun. And again, I'm going to get into more of those stories later. But yeah, but if this helps encourage you in whatever challenge, tribulation that you may have, just know it's not something that you have to deal with alone. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, and God has said that too. He says life is going to be hard, but you're not doing it by yourself. So again, I know I rambled. I do that. So thank you for being patient. And also, if you don't mind, just kind of give me a thumbs up on my whether it's Facebook or YouTube or my TikTok. Just kind of give me a thumbs up so I can kind of see who's watching. It's vanity, you know, but also it kind of helps me see that I'm going the right direction. And I know I've got a lot to learn about doing these videos, and one of the things I'm trying to not do is going I hate watching videos of where people are umming all the time, and I try my best to make sure I'm not doing that. It's it's hard. It's a habit. It's a bad habit. So yeah, but if you can give me like I said, a thumbs up, or you got this kind of thing, I got a few of those, and I appreciate that. Thank you, sister-in-law, and or sis, I should say, and of course mom, and some other family members and some other friends, Deborah and all. Thank you. for kind of giving me that little pat on the back. That kind of helps me see somebody's paying attention to what I'm sharing. And I encourage you to uh, kind of be there for other people. Not saying me, but when you see that other people are struggling, sometimes they need to, like I said, that one lady just turn around in the middle of church saying, "I don't know you, but," if God is calling you to open that door for somebody and say, "Hey, I can be there for you." You know, there's so many. The only reason why I was able to teach, the only reason why I was able to do Awana, the only way I was able to do creative arts ministry was because people provided for me. People got me where I needed to go, and I would feel guilty, you know, for having to ask people to do stuff for me. But the way there was a couple different people who told me that helping you bless others is a blessing to me. And they'd be like, "Don't take away my blessing by not asking me to help you." And, oh, okay. You know, yeah, you know, a little bit humbling, but yeah. So again, you know, if you feel like you're being called to be there for somebody, don't be shy, don't be scared. Either they're gonna like say no thanks, and or they might say, "Hey, yeah, I could really use help with this particular situation." I know people who've been struggling, and it's hard for them to ask for help because they're used to being the ones to help others. And you know, it's a little bit of humility, a little bit of pride. I'm talking about myself, but guess what? God has put us on this earth to be there for each other. We are not hermits. We are not living up in the mountains like was Ezekiel, or I get my Bible characters confused. But we're not up in the mountains by ourselves being loners. We're on this earth, and we're supposed to be able to share our trials and our joys. You know, whether it's good or bad, we're there for each other. And hopefully I can share more good stuff with you than bad stuff. I feel kind of sad that I always have to be the one to sit there and say, "Oh, I had this and this happened, blah, blah." I've got good stories too. I've got some positive. I think the one about, you know, my student sharing with his mom, I think that's a good story. And I think I got some good other ones like that as well. So I'm going to let y'all go because I'm just rambling. And I know I get tired of hearing myself sometimes, so especially with a headset on. So you take care of yourself. I'm going to try to have another episode, and it's probably going to be a little bit more cringe with some of the vision issues, some of my other stories, especially the retina detachment. You know, it's going to be involved. So again, take care, be blessed, and be a blessing. And I love y'all. And, you know, like I said, and if you know somebody who would appreciate my story, please share, because there's a reason why God's called me to do this. Actually, it was my daughter-in-law who provoked me to start sharing these stories. So blame it on her if you don't like it. No, I'm not going to throw her under the bus. But again, if God has called me to do this for a reason, I'm just going to rely on Him that He's going to put me in the right path. So blessings to all. Love you. Bye.